There is one thing you'll notice about those that rule this world. They are flexible. And because they are flexible, they're also practical. During the time when Christ walked the earth, the Apollo cult arranged it like this. You had Rome, which was the capital of the world, which was quite multicultural also. Then you had Byzantium, which became the eastern capital of the eastern provinces, because within the Roman world there was a big difference between the Greek East and the Latin West. The Greek East was the most important part because that connected the whole world's economy. So eventually Byzantium became quite important for the East. Rome remained the world's capital. For the Nordic tribes in Northern Europe, they established Londinium in the British Isles. So those were three main centers in the empire. Londinium, today we call it London, Roma, this Rome, and Byzantium. Today that's place called Istanbul. Outside of the Roman jurisdiction, you had the Han dynasty, which was the second Apollonian administration on the earth. Remember, the world was run by the Apollo cult. In India, you had a minor Apollo center, because you also had an empire over there. So you had three big empires. I'm not calling it the Parthian Empire, because the Parthian Empire was like an extension of the Roman Empire in practice. So you had three empires that were really three administrations that governed the world. And in the Western Hemisphere, you had the Mayan administration, because there weren't that many people living in the Western Hemisphere to begin with. So the Mayan administration was the Apollo administration of the Western Hemisphere. That's how they did it. And it worked. It was quite open who ran the world. They had statues of the beast everywhere. That's Apollo, or Helios, or the unconquered sun, Sol Invictus in Latin, as he also was called. So people knew what the game was. Ever since Christianity emerged, things had to change, because Christianity became the #1 social and economic force on the earth. So it threatened the world system. So the Apollonian rulers realized we need to adapt. We can't suppress this thing, this movement of Jesus of Nazareth anymore. We can't suppress it anymore. We can't suppress Christianity, because it's the way, the truth, and the life, because Christianity is the movement of Christ amongst humanity. They know Christ is real, so they know they can't win from him, but they knew for them to continue their world system and their world power, they had to adapt. So around the 4th century, when the world system was kind of collapsing, one of the leaders of the world, which became the Roman Emperor, the world ruler, he decided, you know what? We don't agree with Christ. We especially don't agree with his followers. But we have to get along with his followers one way or the other. We can't get along with them openly, because they will oppose our darkness. And they will oppose what we want to do, which is keeping the human population in a state of anxiety for Satan. So we can't get along with them openly. What are we going to do? We're going to align ourselves with their movement for Christ, and we are going to pretend as if we are on the same mission as they are. And then there were other Apollonian rulers that said, you know what? Constantinus thinks that, okay, we need to align ourselves with the Christian movement, but you know what? there's one thing those Christians don't have. They don't have any centralized administration. They don't. They have local administrations of local churches. And listen, when I say church now, I'm not talking about an institution. But church, I mean ecclesia means congregation. Okay, congregation is a better word. So the other Apollonian rulers realized they only have congregations here and there. And they're quite diverse. You know what? If we now begin to lead this movement of Christianity and we offer our centralized knowledge, they will think we are sent by God. And that is what we'll do to trap them back under Apollo worship. Then we will continue the world system, but we'll hide the image of Apollo for just a while. We'll do that to make sure we retain our hold on humanity, and we'll do this by aligning ourselves with the Christians who are dominant. Because the Apollonians realized that you will never get rid of Christianity, never. So they came with their counterfeit Christianity, which is just the Apollo worship of the ancient Greeks and Romans, but with a quote-unquote Christian mask. And that's how it has been ever since. Well, when the Middle Ages were ending, you had this movement of people that protested against the Roman Catholic system, and Protestantism came up. And Protestantism, whoa, it reached a lot of people worldwide. At the time, there was a lot of merchandise going all over the world, so through trade it also reached many other people, even in Asia and in Africa. So it went on, and the Apollonian rulers realized, you know what? We need to adapt again. We are now pretending to be the leaders of Christianity, and now we have our own version of Christianity, which is pagan Christianity, which is a counterfeit Christianity, but they think is the real deal. But now we're challenged by people who are operating in the real. So the way we've been governing the world with Apollonian centers, it needs to end. And that's where the Jesuits came in. Since then, they reformed how the world was governed. The Spanish Empire was the #1 economic zone. It was the international zone of the world. The Portuguese Empire was dependent on the Spanish Empire. It was like an extension of the Spanish Empire. So the Jesuits used the Portuguese Empire to finance their projects. And when the 19th century approached, a new reset happened. That's why you had the Napoleon era. Napoleon was a Jesuit puppet. And in the age of popular racism came under the British and French empires. But that also went wrong. So after the Second World War, the British Empire was fading, and the United States took over for a while. And now the United States hegemony is fading also. Let me say it has ended. So now it's through the Islamic world that the pagan rulers are working to keep the human population in a state of anxiety. In these few minutes that I've been speaking, I've explained how those that rule the world adapted. If you remember in the beginning of this recording, I mentioned that they began to copycat believers just to trick believers into thinking that they were on the same mission as we were. This, however, was far from the case. They were absolutely not on the same mission as us, the believers. They were on the opposite mission, against Christ. But they studied our weaknesses. They studied us. And because they studied us, and they were successful in studying us and in mapping us, they came up with a plan to masquerade as us. And they even got a hold over us. And this hold, they retained it for centuries. And till this day, this hold continues through those Babylon churches. They are flexible. They are practical. They adapt. That is what they do. That's why they succeed in many things they want to do. And then you have believers of today. They're holding on to so many doctrines and traditions that were transferred onto them by their ancestors who were trapped by those Apollonians that pretended to be believers. But those Apollonians of today, they know the history far better than many believers. And let me say like this, they look at believers and they are often shocked that believers don't look at the bigger picture. Look, it is because believers in the 2nd and 3rd century almost destroyed the whole world system that they took on this Christian mosque. That's the only reason they still have that Christian mosque. That's why they call themselves the Society of Jesus. That's why they call themselves with the name of Christ, even though they are operating against Christ. Because they know that Christianity is very effective. It's much more effective than their paganism. That's why they came up with their version of Christianity, pagan Christianity, to confuse the world's population. And that's why Christ wants you free from pagan Christianity. Christ wants you to operate in His power, in His strength. That's true Christianity. Pagan Christianity is what most folks are familiar with. Whether it's in an attractive sense that they are part of it, they rejoice in it, or whether it's in an aversive sense, they hate it, that they call themselves atheists or agnostics or Satanists, it doesn't matter. Most folks are familiar with pagan Christianity. They think that's the real Christianity. It's not. Pagan Christianity succeeds because those that run pagan Christianity, they are alert. I mean, this is how they did it. They've heard through their reports that somewhere in Sweden at the time, there was this Protestant movement. So they sent their agents over there that pretended to be Protestants. They even began to lead Protestant congregations. And while doing that, they brought in false teachings that trapped them under the rule of Rome again. They did this to all places where Protestantism rose up. And they didn't even limit themselves to Protestantism. They wanted everyone to know how bad Protestantism was. So they raised up Protestant preachers who were not Protestants at all. Those were just wizards and warlocks, and they preached heresies, and this caused a bad name for Protestantism. So that anytime anyone would mention Protestantism, people in the world would feel aversion. So they conditioned the masses against Christ in such a way. Those Apollonians, they think ahead. They look beyond. They look around them. That's why they succeed. Now, I want believers to succeed, and there are believers who succeed. However, I want believers to succeed more. What's now going on is that many believers remain stuck in those Babylon churches. And they talk about revival, and revival never comes. The revival that believers think they're talking about is when the world is turned upside down for the glory of Christ. But that will never happen in those Babylon churches. The only revival that came from those Babylon churches is the rise of neo-paganism. Those Babylon churches would teach false gospels. They've disappointed many of their members, and at the same time, those same Apollonians offered Wicca, they offered Santeria, Voodoo, they offered all kinds of other options, and many people were drawn to those options. So those Babylon churches, they've promoted paganism. They've caused more people to be trapped by the occult than common unbelievers. If you want to find the perpetrator of why so many people are trapped in the occult today, look at those Babylon churches. They are the main promoters of Antichrist sentiments because they're not teaching anything in line with Christ. They're not. When you look at the bigger picture of the messages they deliver, it's all a lie. They are hoaxing the population. For example, Christ said to turn the other cheek. It was an expression that he used. But what did he mean with that expression? He meant that you need to examine the situation and use the situation in your advantage, that you are free from danger without harming the other, even if the other is the perpetrator. That's how you remain free from escalation of violence while retaining your human value. So Christ never promoted that you had to become a doormat and allow people to just treat you bad whenever they wanted. Christ never said that. But in pagan Christianity, there are two camps. You have the militant camp. Those are the fundamentalist churches. They talk about doomsdays all the time. They're willing to blow up abortion clinics and all of that. Then you have the pacifist ones, who are like the doormats of society. They accept everything, and people are comfortable with them because they accept everything. But where are those that are truly doing what Christ said and anticipating violence and overcoming violence? Where are they? They are around, but they're not promoted by those Babylon churches. Those Babylon churches only show you the duality to draw you away from Christ. That's what they're doing. Yet, you have many believers that keep believing in the institution of church, saying, yeah, the church is the body of Christ, so you have to belong to an institution. Those institutions are man-made. Okay, I don't want to make this video too long, just understand. The Apollonians, they adapt. They're flexible, and because of that, they're practical. That's why they succeed in deceiving the masses. Believers can also have a very big impact if they align themselves with Christ. Those Apollonians, they pay far more attention to what Christ said than many believers. I'm not saying all believers. I'm saying many believers. Because many of the things Christ said, if you examine them well, they are instructions to be effective. But now you have the enemies of Christ who read what Christ said, and they pay attention to what Christ said, and they are effective in the deception they're doing in the name of Christ. So then it's the responsibility of the believer to test all things to see who's really of Christ and who's not. Because Christ said there will be many false prophets, many false Christs will arise, and many will come in my name saying, I am he. Christ said that in his name many miracles will be done and many will be deceived. Christ even said that when he returns, that there will be many folks claiming they've done miracles for him in his name and all of that. But they were never saved. They never belonged to him. So it's the responsibility of the believer to test all things and to retain the good. The good is what aligns with Christ. Again, I'm telling you, believer, be flexible. You should outsmart the Apollonians. You should outsmart the world. You're able to do it if you align yourself with Christ. Be at peace.